Physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer had a pivotal role in the development of the atomic bombs that brought an end to World War II. Today, we examine this man's life story and the meaning of what it all led to, which changed the world. This is Christopher Nolan's Best Picture-winning fire-filled opus from 2023, Oppenheimer.
And now, our feature contemplation.
Speaking Cinema with Andrew Schwarz.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bombs away. And welcome to the Speaking Cinema podcast. I'm Andrew Schwarz, your host. Welcome, everyone, to the only film podcast that's exclusively about the meaning in the movie. And we have an incredible film, an incredible 3-hour epic film, and a Best Picture winner, and an amazing guest to go along with it today. And we're talking about Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, this beast, and a beast of a guest. I'd like to reintroduce our returning guest. He is just an infinite repository of knowledge, and I always love having him on here. And we've talked in the past about some sort of oddball movies, and this is a chance for us to hunker down and talk about something a little bit more, I think, grounded. And he is the one and only Nicholas Stonehouse. Stonehouse, thanks for coming back on the Speaking Cinema podcast.
Thanks for having me back on the podcast, Andrew. And also thanks for finally letting me do one of the 3-hour movies I'm always pitching to you. It seems like every time we're running down a list of movies, I'm like, let's do this 3-hour movie. Let's do this 3.5-hour movie.
Yeah.
So thanks for doing this one with me.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, this one's really special. Not that I'm just anti 3-hour movies, but there are so many 3-hour movies that come out today. And it was just recently, it's been almost a fad with these 3-hour epic movies that demand so much of our lives and our attention. When it's funny to me because we barely even have the attention span to, walk across the street without checking our phones and, risk getting hit by a car. And then we walk into this chamber that we're locked in with other people for 3 hours, and we're supposed to hold our attention to watch these images and everything. And it's great for people like you and me, but sometimes I wonder how people that have less of a film diet are able to do that. But this is a really special one. And I feel like this movie it kind of came and went in a way, which is really strange to say about like this big epic Best Picture winner was so anticipated. I think it came and went in terms of analysis. People definitely talked about it a lot, right? Along with Barbie, as he's wearing a Barbie shirt for those of you that are not watching on video and just audio.
Gotta rep Barbenheimer. That was the event of the season.
Representing. I love that. He's got swag from Barbenheimer. But yeah, it's one of those movies that I feel like it needed more talking about in a very postured way, in a very intellectual way. I think it wants that. The movie seems designed with that in mind, and I just didn't see a lot. Listen, I don't know about you, but I heard when this came out, I heard a lot of things like it's great, it's epic, it's smart, it's emotional too. The things look great. Oh my goodness, there's no CGI. Oh my goodness, what a performance. Oh my goodness, the cinematography, right? Like all these things. But I didn't really hear meaningful conversation about the meaning in the film as it has to do with our society, all those deep, lofty sorts of things that the film is saying and commenting philosophically about us as people with this movie, about technology, about all these things that I feel like we're going to get under the hood with that other people just didn't. So when you mentioned this one as a possibility, I was like, oh, we need to do this 3-hour crazy epic because there's so much there to mine. And I can't wait to do it with you, Stonehouse. So let's get going. The first thing I'd like to do before we go to our overall takes, which is how we start out these recent episodes, where Stonehouse and I will give what we think that this movie literally and maybe even figuratively means, to wrap it all up in a nutshell of what we think the meaning and the significance of this movie is in our own personal words, which we did not tell each other ahead of this recording, ahead of this episode. So we're going to learn what each other thinks that this movie boils down to for the first time, which is always really fun and exciting. We can challenge each other on our takes. We can support each other's takes. We can debate about them. We can go into side conversations about them within the structure of what we normally do in the episode. But that's going to be really fun. But right before we do that, I want to ask you quickly, Stonehouse, you, I think, proposed this movie, or at least I might have sent it to you as a possibility. But then you narrowed a much big list that I gave you down, and this was one of the few on that short list that you shot back at me. And then we kind of both, I guess, decided on it finally. But you definitely seemed pretty adamant about doing this film. What attracted you to this film in general when it came out, and then what makes you want to do it for this podcast?
So Barbenheimer already mentioned, because it is a significant event. It was 2 original movies. We're going to ignore the fact that, it was based on a book and it's based on Mattel property. But they are original screenplays. Like, this isn't, someone had to do the work of putting these stories on the screen. So they're 2 original stories. What I mean is, like, they're not sequels or remakes or things like that. Yeah. You're also, with Oppenheimer, you're getting a 3-hour movie, which we talked about, but you're getting a 3-hour drama in IMAX. I don't know if that's been done before. I think one of the closest is when we had Nope, which is what I would call a sci-fi horror comedy, which is also around 2.5-ish hours long. And I was so excited for Nope and IMAX, and I really enjoyed it. But Oppenheimer, to have this kind of movie in an IMAX theater, represents a step forward, I think, in the movies that people are willing to watch in IMAX theater and in a movie theater in general. It really got tickets sold, people in seats and excited for something for the first time in a long time. And then finally watching the movie, what's really nice is to see him use his typical way he tells a movie in a nonlinear fashion. So he's done this as far back as, like, Memento. We saw a movie get told from the beginning backwards and or the end backwards, however you can describe the way Memento is structured in its chunks that lead from the end of the movie to the beginning but are told forward. You have Dunkirk, which tells from the 3 different time perspectives of, was it like a couple weeks or days and then a couple hours throughout the movie, or tracking different timelines. Then Inception and Interstellar, he dealt with these ideas of relativity, which you fast forward to Oppenheimer, we have Einstein as a character in Oppenheimer. Yeah. So Oppenheimer is kind of the fission of all of his past projects and interest in nonlinear storytelling and science fiction elements put together. And now to get to the point where you're talking about, why should we do it for the Speaking Cinema podcast? It's because I think a lot of people, even though they enjoyed the movie, I don't know if they got really what I saw that it was really about, because even positive or negative, it's people seem to think it was the idea that the plot of the movie is either about Oppenheimer building the bomb, which that's part of it, or it's about him having regrets about building the bomb. And those are 2 parts of this very large, all-encompassing movie that are in there. But I think what Oppenheimer is ultimately about is, it's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy of all of these people, scientists, government, civilians, that weave in and out of his life, and his basically entire life catches up to him, and how it unravels because of all these people that were involved in it, whether intentionally or not. And so to say, why would I feel bad for Oppenheimer? I don't think the movie's saying that that's the story of, oh, he built the bomb, now he feels bad about it. That would be too simple. So what Nolan did was say, these are all of like the people in your life can take everything that's ever happened to you and bring it kind of full circle. And you might have like changed the world, but they can also change your world.
Yeah. And that's your take.
Yeah, I have a lot of different
Basically,
themes that we
right?
can cycle back on.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But
let's.
that's your overall take. The Shakespearean
Yeah.
tragedy of the life of Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
That is very fascinating. Yeah, I like that. I do, because it is Shakespearean. There's almost like a King Lear-esque structure, and the way that the movie is built is you have this character who's a leader, and it's about, leadership is a whole academic category in and of itself, of just what makes a leader a good leader, what makes someone an effective leader to get things done, as Strauss says, right at the end, to get things done in Washington and so on. And but there's a personal philosophy to leadership as well as just the theory, right? And again, theory will only take you so far, which is one of the quotes that recurs in the movie. So yeah, that is very interesting. And there's something about this empire of sorts that he builds. It's not really an empire in terms of like population. It's an empire of thought, right? It's an empire of concept, and just the whole idea of consequence when those ideas are implemented in the society. That is sort of an empire of these titans of thought and knowledge that he gathers to pull this thing off. And so yeah, I do like that take of it being a Shakespearean sort of drama and portrait of this man. So my take is, I think I went a little bit more into, I guess you could say, less specific, a little bit more vague. But I think overall, Oppenheimer is a movie about the correlation between dropping the bomb and dropping the ball. So I think that it poses the question of, whether or not those two things, dropping the ball and dropping the bomb, are one and the same. And by dropping the ball, I mean basically screwing up, making a mistake. It didn't go as planned. You failed, in a sense, somehow. And the parts of the film that are about dropping the ball, that making mistakes, they're not just the bomb itself possibly being just an enormous mistake in general, but I just think like the adverse effects of what comes from the bomb, like you were saying a little bit, both social and political, and even all the things that lead up to that, told through the life of the character, Oppenheimer. Just all the things that led up to that, the building of this bomb, and not even just Oppenheimer, but other people too, but mainly through the life of Oppenheimer, we see it. It just basically shows the shortcomings of humanity in general, that lead to this possible mistake and other mistakes. And we're just using a particular human that's part of humanity as an example of this. Okay, the film itself is a chain reaction of moral and ethical mistakes. And I think I want to get a little more into that in the closing image, that final section, which we will talk about. But yeah, very fascinating. Real quick, what do you think of that take?
So I have that similar chain reaction. I have basically four main themes that I'll be cycling throughout this to try and contain the thoughts on track. Mine is that the chain reaction is how the pursuit of science itself is a chain reaction. And you have all of kind of the forefront, the foundation of Oppenheimer's learning. then he has his contribution. And then where it goes from there isn't really up to him. It's up to others to pick that up. But no matter what they do, it can always be used irresponsibly. And it's just kind of that ticking doomsday clock, more of a question of when than if the scientific pursuits will lead to the end of the world. So I have that chain reaction science thing. I have the idea of this movie uses Prometheus as a kind of foil image for him to say like, oh, he's like Prometheus. And I have the quote written down. We can get to that. It's kind of part of the title. But I liken him more to a Dr. Frankenstein, where his creation gets out of control and he is now responsible for things that he never meant to be. And I think it kind of almost makes Oppenheimer a horror movie in that sense. There's a lot that makes it a horror movie, but that kind of parallel to Frankenstein. Then I have one of the things I mentioned earlier, the burden of knowledge and the guilt of responsibility. So there is, I like that he has a recurring guilt throughout the movie. It's not just about the bomb. We see multiple instances of him regretting something that he did or was about to do. So I like that it wasn't just the one of, oh, he makes a bomb and now he regrets it. It's like we can see this through line throughout his life because Nolan gave us 3 hours to explore his life. And then the final one I have is just the surveillance state and how everything you say and do can be used against you. And this goes far back to a pre-internet age. We think of that now as, you know, I turned my laptop and microphone off after this and someone's still listening. But back then, there are a lot of scenes where things he did or said, he never thought would be coming back, you know, years later.
Yeah. Yeah, all very interesting. So let's take all that into the movie itself. We're going to dive right in, folks. Let's go to a quick title take. Oppenheimer, as opposed to the original title of the book, which was
American Prometheus, and I think there's a long subtitle. But yeah, that was my one question that I had for you is why not use that original title, American Prometheus? Why change it to Oppenheimer?
Yeah, this was an interesting personal, I think, creative choice for, well, I don't know if it was because I believe, I think that Nolan is credited for writing it on his own. I don't think that like Jonathan helped him or because it was a book. The subtitle is The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer. It sounds like a very typical sort of like biography sort of subtitle. But yeah, they could have just named the film American Prometheus. I think that's a great question. Why not American Prometheus? It's the name of the book. It's the metaphor of the movie. Here we go. Why not just throw it right in there? I think a couple reasons. Number one, the movie Prometheus exists.
Yeah, I thought about that
right?
too. Yes.
And it's like, how many movies have used Prometheus in the title? And then the one that did is just called Prometheus. It's not like any other context, like, you know, Prometheus walking to the general store. You know, it's just like you can't latch on any other context to it. It's just Prometheus in big shining lights. And that movie was something of a hit. Everyone went to see it, and it really reverberated throughout our society. You know, as a meme, as an event. Like that movie was an event. It was really something. It was different than other alien movies. It took people by surprise. And because
I'm a big Prometheus defender. Yeah,
me too. I love Prometheus. It's not perfect. But man, they took a swing and they tried for something different, and I always admire that. Like the biggest currency for film to me is just something interesting. Something maybe I wasn't predicting, hadn't seen, never saw these images before per se, don't know what's going to happen next, all that kind of stuff. So
raised a lot of questions that it didn't answer, which people found frustrating, and I understand.
Yes.
If anyone wants to give it a 1-star review, I go, you're kind of correct. But I liked what it did.
Sure. It was almost like an art film, which really took me by surprise. But anyway, yeah, that film kind of killed any other for the next like maybe 30 years or something. It killed any other movie. A generation or two has to go by before something can be called Prometheus, and then not have an eye roll or two by basically half of America, at least. So that's number one. And then number two, I think even if Prometheus didn't exist as a movie, American Prometheus is a little bit less specific. And usually, I think I would agree with Nolan even if Prometheus didn't exist, because I was talking about this recently with Jesse Mendelson, another frequent guest, about titles. And he was saying something about how when the title is the metaphor, sometimes it's so forward and it's so overt that the fun of the movie, which is figuring out what's going, what this thing is, why it is, what it's giving me, what it's telling me, what's whispering in my ear, when it's just there, metaphor, the movie in IMAX, come see it this weekend. You know what I mean? It's not as fun for the movie, for the moviegoers, for the audience, and especially people like us that really like to get into the weeds. So yeah, and Oppenheimer, I think that just calling it the name of this man who has this swirling, almost the universe just hanging on his shoulders. Quite literally, in a point in the movie, the world could possibly have been destroyed. But the weight of all of the universe and human affairs, philosophy, politics, seeming to be swirling around this man, this guy, right? This is the perspective that comes with the movie. This is what we're given. It's through the lens of Oppenheimer, in quite the most literal sense that it could be, right? We're seeing his stream of consciousness in many points in the movie. So, and even the poster that I'm staring at right now is this ball of fire and these mechanisms and this swirling craziness around this one man who's just trying to stand up straight and get some sort of bearings in the world. So I think that the poster, even if it didn't have the title there, Oppenheimer, we get that this is the entire world on his shoulders. And that's what this perspective of the movie is. The perspective is through him. And the movie's about so many big things. It's nice to have a title that's one person, one word, and outlines the perspective through which we can see all the other stuff, instead of just, here's the metaphor. There it is. Done. Bye. Have a nice day, So that's what I think about it. What do you think?
Your word perspective is perfectly succinct, because there are multiple perspectives that Oppenheimer's story is told through, with Strauss and we get a lot of other characters' screen time. We might not get their perspectives, but the fact that you're getting two dual perspectives of one character's story, you were saying, it's a good title to have, to say, okay, we're not going to call this movie American Prometheus, because what if somebody decides to write some review that's like, actually Strauss was the American Prometheus? It's like, oh, you completely missed the point. This movie is about Oppenheimer, and I do think it's also a pretty cool name, so it lends itself to a movie title pretty well.
It is. And for people like us, the dean of our, because we both went to Hofstra, do you remember the dean of our film department was Oppenheim? Yeah. I think his name was Oppenheim, his last name. So every time I'm not sure if he's still there, because this was a while ago. This was 10 or more years ago. But Dean Oppenheim ran the film department, or the communications school, or something like that at Hofstra, where we went. And that was, I always think about him for some reason.
Hopefully he's not getting too much hate mail based on making the atomic bomb.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about vicarious punishment. But anyway, let's move on, because what we always like to do here, as well as go through the final image, of course, but first the opening image and the opening sequence. Talk about the meaning of this. Then what we'll do is we're going to go into Scenic View, which is the middle portion of our episode, which is we can jump around to any scene that we want to talk about at any point, and then again we'll go to the final image and final sequence. And that's how our conversation is going to map out here, folks. So first, I'm going to summarize for Stonehouse and everyone else listening, just to remind ourselves of what this opening sequence is. And then I'm going to pose the question to Stonehouse, hey, what the hell does this mean? And why is it important for the movie and the meaning and all of that and so on? So, the first image, actually the first sound rather, is we hear rain pattering sounds. Then the actual first image that we see is a close-up of rain lightly hitting a puddle, which reflects this cold bluish image of the walls and windows of one of the buildings of Cambridge University, where Oppenheimer attended when he was younger. Next, a medium close-up of a young J. Robert Oppenheimer, played, of course, by the brilliant Cillian Murphy. The camera kind of tracks toward him slowly as he stares down at this puddle, pondering what he sees. Then, next, we see a montage of these, quite literally, striking images, sputtering fireballs hurling away from a giant orb of fire and swirling cosmic clouds, sparks, distorted nebulous clusters of gaseous, wavy textures, intense fire lighting up the screen, is then accompanied by a rhythmic thudding sound. I almost think it sounded like a train. This thudding sound over the synth drones of the score. And then the thudding increases in speed and volume. And then that gives way to an opening title, a quote that Stonehouse was referring to before. It says, "Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. For this, he was chained to a rock and tortured for eternity." Wow. Then the thudding crescendos and intensifies even more, along with the firelight getting brighter and brighter. Then we crash cut to a close-up of a much older Oppenheimer with his eyes closed. The thudding and musical score suddenly stop as he opens his eyes and he sighs. His eyes shift slightly from left to right, and his face shows us anxiety. A chairman says, "Dr. Oppenheimer, as we begin, I believe you have a statement to read into the record." A title on the screen appears. 1. Fission. The camera pulls slightly away slowly from Oppenheimer as he replies to the chairman with, "Yes, Your Honor." And then that, of course, catapults us into the movie. Wow, what an opening, especially if you've never seen this movie before, right, Stonehouse? I mean, it just bombards you with sound and fury of images. And I'm wondering, what do you make of this? What does this mean? The opening image of this puddle, and then followed by Oppenheimer studying this puddle, and then everything else that comes after it.
I'd completely forgot that the rain on the puddle was the opening image. I could have sworn it was like, yeah, that fire or a close up of him or something like that. And so this was a lot of fun to talk about. That I think that's continuing kind of that chain reaction idea. That's going to come back a lot, is seeing something and then getting an idea from it. So he sees rain, water hitting the puddles on the ground, and then the splashes kind of converge into each other, and you're getting those fission and fusion ideas, I think, of the things that go on to make the bomb, because there's a part in the movie where someone's like, oh, you bombard an atom, and then that bombards other atoms, so it's that chain reaction, and the puddle itself has those chain reactions going on in it. So I like that, seeing that foundation of his ideas and his brain working in scientific ways. It kind of reminded me of something they make sure to hammer in a lot in a communications degree or a liberal arts education, is Philo T. Farnsworth making television. Is he got the idea from his rows of crops on the farm, because he grew up on a farm, and somehow used that to make the idea of the interlaced bars of that would make the picture of television. And so you would never think that crop farming would go hand in hand with television, and yet here you're getting a rain in a puddle and you're getting the nuclear bomb. So I thought about that connection a little bit, and I also thought about how Some of the effects of the bomb would be acid rain, would be ash falling from the sky. So you get that connection. And then the rest of your intro, you're talking about some of the other things it cuts to. It cuts to him viewing the puddle as a young man. It cuts to him way in the future as an old man at his hearing. And so you're getting that introduction into the way he's going to tell the movie so quickly. It's not like you figure this out later and you're like, wait, I'm kind of, I'm kind of lost. It's telling you right up front, this is the way we're telling the movie, out of order. And by the end of the movie, it's all going to fall into place and you're going to get it.
Yeah. It's like a preamble. It's one of those. It reminds me a little bit of, I mean, it's not a one-to-one, but we did Saltburn, just talking about these recent movies, because this one's 2023, Saltburn's 2022, I believe. We did Saltburn with Adam, and that opening sequence, if you've seen it, is just a whole bunch of, it's an extremely, like, meaty, long montage of different...
Talking about the ending? Oh.
Well, the beginning. Oh, was that a joke? I don't know if I got it.
Yeah, you said medium long.
That's beautiful.
I'm a big Saltburn defender too. Another movie that a lot of people might not
lengthy and girthy sequence. a very lengthy and girthy sequence at the beginning of Saltburn. That is completely nonlinear and just jumps to all different kinds of things. But yeah, this, which I think I believe I analyzed in that episode as something of an overture to like an opera, and this was sort of an overture, I think, especially the fire and so on. A big, noisy, musical almost overture, highlighting and summarizing the themes of what we're about to see. And again, jokes, quite literally, the gravity, the gravitas of all of the lofty concepts that are in this movie, just how much they have pull for the future of humanity, for our existence. These are existential themes, and therefore we're treated to this big, bold imagery, and it shows us this movie that you're about to watch. Strap in, right? Buckle your seatbelts, because we're going to say some big, bold, lofty things. And that's much like an opera. The biggest, boldest themes of the music are up here, all clumped together in different parts and pieces of the opera. All the themes and the different arias and things are kind of clustered together in this one sort of condensed piece. And that's sort of what I felt like this was. But also, I think you said a lot of very interesting things about that opening image. The acid rain, good Lord, I did not even think of that. That's brilliant. And yeah, the ash flying, I mean, that's unbelievable. So in terms of foreshadowing and the ominousness of that, absolutely, I think you nailed that. What was amazing to me was how well the complement of the opening images was in the form of that image after the opening image. Oppenheimer, the man, the subject of this piece, staring down into this reflection of the world. It's almost very artistic. Not just the shot itself, but I mean, it's like man interprets art. Man sees a reflection of reality, not quite reality, right? It's an image reflected back to him, and he understands something about it that he didn't before through this interpretation. Of course, this is part of reality, but it just made me think of a man or woman walking into a museum and studying a piece of art. This image that's not directly part of the world. It's a representation. And when you can just when something really strikes you and it's very interesting or evocative, this image, and this is why I never understood this as a kid, and now I do. Right, when I'm an adult, you can walk into a museum and you find that piece of art that resonates with you for whatever reason, and you just stare at it because it's there's something about it that's unnatural, and yet it speaks so clearly and honestly about the reality in which you live. And there's something amazing about that. So not just the foreshadowing element, which I think is absolutely there, and it's upon a rewatch, it's so I'm going to use all of these. It's nuclear. The reaction that I had to seeing that, I just couldn't believe like how much that affected me. Like, and same thing as you, by the way. I forgot that was the opening image. I thought the opening image was the fire and the bluster and everything. But man, the subtlety there is incredible. And I love that the image also of just him being a young man, a student, learning the ways of the world, learning all of the particulars, the theory of what he does, which is understanding the world in a physicalist sense. That's what physics is. But there's also this element that comes in a little bit later of when he says, I was sort of tortured, I think he said, by imagining, whatever he says, the images of my mind that was haunting me of this underlying secret world, which turns out to be, I suppose, the world of quantum physics and quantum mechanics, right? But that image of him discovering what there is about the world that's unseen. I almost got this kind of idea, this modern idea of dark matter, that I think we even have discovered that, or postulated at least, that most of the universe is filled with this dark matter that we can't even see or detect, right? I mean, so to stare into a puddle on a rainy day and see all of the darkness and that bluish, coldness of the world in a way that it doesn't quite ring to you when you're looking at the world not through that reflection. It's as if he's just pondering, I'm seeing something completely different than I normally do. What else is out there? What if I were to take a puddle and stare at anything else in the universe through this puddle? What is the difference? What am I seeing in this reflection that I'm not seeing normally? And that to me is captivating about this movie and captivating about this person who is able to see, hear, and see the sounds, see them, hear the music in his head. The thing that's not tangible. It's there for the listening in your head, and then you can somehow externalize that into your work in the real world for other people to perceive as well. And that's what happens in this movie as well. In a sort of artistic sense, he takes his ideas and his mind and he externalizes that into physical, into understanding the physical world, but then it amounts to this physical thing that he creates, So it just gives me all of that in this one subtle opening image. I love that opening image. I was so happy when I saw that. I just let out a big audible wow in that opening image, as opposed to all the other fire stuff, which I was like, oh yeah, I knew that was cool. But this opening image, but this puddle, wow, it's so cool that it could make me do that.
I had to rewind. I was like, there's no way.
It must have skipped.
Yeah, there must have been something.
My damn bandwidth isn't working. Yeah. So let's head away right off into Scenic View, because we have a lot of scenes. We have a treasure trove, we have volumes of scenes to choose from and go back and forth between. Which actually, ironically, I think that there's a lot of scenes, right? It just in terms of like, if you're going to put a script together and just, or a shot list together, there are a lot of shots, there are a lot of scene numbers, but there aren't too many locations and scenes. I mean, there are, but for a 3-hour movie, it does keep returning, right? To, like you said, in a nonlinear way, it keeps returning to that boardroom. It keeps returning to Los Alamos, returning to Florence Pugh, and we get familiar with the places. It's not like it just takes us on this, this Odyssean sort of journey, and we just keep visiting new place, new place, new place, new place, and then the hero just returns at the end, right? It's not that. It's an amalgamation of places, but we get to know what they are. So to me, especially upon the second viewing, this is a movie that really requires many viewings. I didn't find it difficult to follow in terms of place. I knew my bearings. I knew where I was. I knew where the institutions were, and so on. So, but I'll leave it to you, Stonehouse. Where do you think you want to start? Where's a good place, a scene that really jumped out at you that can be a springboard for us to start talking about the rest of the movie?
Yeah, I tried to organize this the best way I could. The kind of first, I guess, concept I would be what I called the portrait of the artist as a young man. This would be his foundational learning time. Some of the early things that went on would be his studying in school, his early relationships, and some of the political involvements that he had in at the time that would come back later in his life. So those early things I would start with. I think the first thing I wrote down is that I was talking about the recurring theme of his regret would come up a lot. One of the first things that happens is this poisoned apple. And I thought of that.
I was just going to say that. I'm so happy that you chose that.
Yeah. It happens pretty early in the movie, and it's just kind of a great foreshadowing of a lot of things that would go on. So there's he grabs the apple, which I really like as a symbol of knowledge. It's something that you shouldn't have, and it ends up destroying people. This kind of goes along with the Prometheus link of he took fire and it destroyed people. You're taking the apple of knowledge, and that is also banning you from Garden of Eden. And so what he's doing is he's taking this apple that's meant for his teacher, and he is mad at his teacher. So it's not really clear exactly what he puts in it. I guess it's some kind of poison. I don't know if it's fatal or not.
It's basically cyanide, I think, is what the label on it's literally
they just
the
have
bottle
that
was
in
labeled
the lab.
cyanide. Yeah, hey, this is an institution of one of the most famous institutions of higher learning. Why not have a little bit of possible death?
So he takes that, and injects the apple, and then he comes back later and he stops him. Or actually, I think visiting, that might be Niels Bohr, I think, is visiting and doing a talk, and he's the one that grabs it. So maybe he was content to let his teacher die, and he was just saving Mr. Bohr, Dr. Bohr, from eating it. But like I said, it's that theme of regretting something. And
this is the rule: never kill Kenneth Branagh's character. It's just an untold rule. But anyway,
because he has to solve the murder in the Agatha Christie movies.
Exactly.
So this time there's no blood on his hands, but later there's actually kind of compounding blood on his hands. So the next thing, or is there anything more about the apple?
Oh man, I love the apple. I really do. And it's the reason that he's mad at his professor is because the professor sort of openly criticizes him for his shortcomings in the lab. Right, his physical lab work is terrible. By his own admission to the board, Oppenheimer, as he's speaking about his own life. And I really thought that, even just to start there, I thought that said something, because you were talking about the early life, and again, the meaning of this movie, like you're saying, is swirling around, just following this one man's path. And this becomes a sort of symbol for early life learning and, the path toward enlightenment. And I just thought that said so much about the fragility of the male ego. And I think I forget what podcast I was listening to. I think it was I can't remember who was talking about this, but I think it might have been Steve Schmidt, who's a political commentator and a speechwriter, and he said, "There's no flower more delicate than that of the male ego." right? And I just thought that this was a perfect representation of that, because you have this young person who's learning, and he already knows that he has this talent and this great, maybe sort of expanded consciousness, right? His way of again hearing the music, seeing the world in his head, postulating, thinking about things with this imagery, different ways than other people think. And when we're young and when we're students, we think we know it all, and we think we have all of the potential. We always have the potential, and we have all of that hope and that confidence in ourselves, even when it's not necessarily deserved. But we'll learn that later, right? But at the beginning of your sort of bridge into the professional world, the real world, as they say, there you always have that sense of ego, right? That's very fragile. And once it's broken by someone, when you go to an institution of higher learning or so on, a place that's supposed to challenge your ideas, and test whether your ideas are strong enough to hold up against other ideas in the marketplace of knowledge, in the marketplace of ideas, when that crumbles, or when you feel like you are being criticized academically for something that's your thing for the first time, maybe, right? This is your thing. You always wanted to do this since you were a kid. You always had the gift. You know that you're going to be the best. And then that comes crashing down when someone tells you, yeah, no, you can't come to the lecture. You have to stay behind and clean up all the mess that you made in the lab because you're not good enough. There's something about, especially the young male, when that goes down, something happens, right? It's very difficult to bear. And so what he does is he takes cyanide out of the cabinet and he injects it into the apple. And it's like dripping down the side. It's obvious. He's so like intense about it. Just so cold and callous. And then he leaves. And then what happens to get him to come back? He sees visions of more fire and more, chaos. And he wakes up and he in a sweat and he immediately rushes, right? But the whole point of this Stonehouse is it's the hindsight that gets him. It's in the rearview mirror. And he has absolutely no idea if he just murdered someone. And so there's I guess you can say, the dog catching the car effect that happens here, right? The humanity, or the inhumanity, I should say, of what he did is a much slower paced mechanism than the instinct, of course, right? And so in the moment, we're so emotional and we have this ego. And in the moment, and that connects to later, let's say in the moment of war, right, of a world war, we have this context, this moment that we have to meet and we have to do something, specific action that, the military is telling you and pressuring you to carry out. It's the same thing here. He feels like he needs to carry out vengeance. And then, when it's possibly too late, that's when his morality catches up with him. Then he runs, and thank goodness that no one's eaten that apple. And of course, the apple looks like a bomb. It's so many things. It's Adam and Eve.
I was just thinking of Snow White. Isn't there a poisoned apple?
Yes. Yeah, and for very similar reasons. Of course, that's a little bit more vanity. But I think that there is a vanity in this. There's a lot of ego, especially in the Strauss character, played by a wonderful Robert Downey Jr., who, everyone won for this thing, basically. A great performance. A person that doesn't even need to give a good performance. He could just dial it in because he's Iron Man, But he really gave it, and it was very impressive. But I think that we'll talk about this more near the end, but that character is all about ego and self-importance. And that character is, in a sense, an adult version of this young Oppenheimer who's not quite able to see the moral and ethical forest through the trees of the situation. right? So, and it's terrifying. It's a terrifying prospect that humanity has this such a strong proclivity to do that. You know, he was so eager to just poison his teacher and kill him. And then it's a universe of difference emotionally when he wakes up the next morning. And that's what this movie is saying right off the bat at the very beginning. We have to be really careful of that, right? Like, how often is the moral and ethical thing in the grand scheme of everything? How often is that choice, that optimal choice, decided in the moment, right? As opposed to deep thinking, think tanking, getting together, brainstorming, and really pulling a lot of minds together. So what do you think about that?
Definitely. And I think, so the next scene, the next example I have of that same thing that, being a bit rash and regretting it later is the way he deals with Jean, his relationship with Jean. It's the same thing as the apple. And he meets her. They have a very interesting sort of relationship where she's not romantic to him at all, but they continue their relationship. And it's kind of like an on again, off again, maybe. It's kind of, he doesn't show too much of it. But there's the idea later that, and now we'll get into, I guess, the first real spoilers of the movie, is that she becomes to be known as mentally unstable in some way. It's not really exactly clear, but she's got some sort of instability. And then later, this develops into her needing psychiatric treatment. And I think Oppenheimer thinks it would do her some good, but his leaving the situation and allowing her to be treated, that is, he thinks that would be a good thing for her. But it seems that kind of every decision he makes that he thinks is right, again, with the hindsight you were talking about, ends up being wrong. So he's like, oh, maybe I should have been there for her instead of just abandoning her to this treatment. And then eventually she ends up taking her own life. And he feels, I think, one of his last meetings that maybe he shouldn't have gone to see her. He thought at the time, she says, I need to see you. He's like, okay, this sounds really important. Then I should see her. And then it's this, big, long conversation about, all the things he did wrong. And later he's thinking maybe going again and giving her that same thing of withdrawing and never seeing her again, maybe doing that again is also a mistake that he shouldn't have done, that drove her to suicide. So this is the first time in the movie in his life that he literally feels like he has blood on his hands, that some life has been lost due to his actions.
Yeah. It's also the only time that he overtly cries, I believe. Even after the
when
bomb,
he runs away.
When he runs away and Emily Blunt's character finds him, his wife, he is just distraught emotionally. I think the only reason he's not after the bomb is because he's mostly in front of the press. He's among all the politicians, right? And he doesn't have the space to do that. But yeah, when Jean dies by suicide, he loses it. Yeah, absolutely. Now, those were great examples. But if you were to condense all of that into one sentence to show what the movie is saying with the relationship of Jean and Robert, what do you think that would be? What is the movie saying to us with this relationship that they had?
I think it's just another example of him not being able to deal with what he created. He had a contribution to this, and he made decisions, again, that he thought were right at the time, but he ends up regretting later. And that's going to be... I have a whole separate chunk of this movie. After we're done talking about his early life, we'll talk about building the bomb. And that's...
You might as well go chronologically. I I think it's really cool. It's a very interesting like sidecar like a B plot sort of sidecar rolling along the main, next to the main vehicle that this film is taking us in. And I think you're right. It is a complementary, not a microcosm, but it's a complementary side plot that runs along the same. It's fueled by the same misfortunes and misfires of the character, right? And it's going to lead us into the much bigger version of what that is, and that's one death, right? And that almost destroys him ahead of what's coming, ahead of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of deaths that are caused by this. And that is a powerful, powerful thing, because especially just a quick little sidebar about filmmaking, it's tough. I know that this is a true story, but it's tough to write and construct B plots, we call them, that somehow that fit nicely and tightly into the main morale of the movie, and Nolan has managed to take this real life B plot and dovetail it very nicely into the main attraction, morally and ethically. And it's amazing how he's done that, because you can take this. There's this idea that I get from it. I don't know about you, but when we take a look into the heart and the emotion of one character, an important character that was close to the main character, but the Jean character, played very well by Florence Pugh in the little time that she does have in the film, we get to see all of the nuances and the difficulties of this life that she was living, right? Her own issues, her own emotional burdens, and all of the things in her life that made everything difficult, but it needed to be overcome somehow. And you get the feeling through the way that the film portrays it, or at least I do, that, yeah, this was surmountable. Right? There could have been something done to prevent this death. This one person's death that we care about and we focus in on. It's almost as if Nolan is plucking out one person of the hundreds of thousands that died in the bombs, just one, and zooming in and saying, this was a life that could have been happy and it could have been fulfilling and we could have saved it. And then he zooms back out, right? And says, yeah, that was just one individual that person cried for. He wasn't even married to the person. It wasn't even, that kind of a situation. And yet he still cried for them. Now imagine 100,000 genes. Imagine 200,000 genes, right? And now imagine that they're not mentally ill, or at least in different ways. Imagine that they're surrounded by people that love them, which many of them were. Imagine that they were going to be as brilliant of a physicist as Oppenheimer. Maybe one of the people among them was like that. Imagine how many of them what they would have created, what they would have invented, how they would have contributed to the world and contributed to society. Jean was clearly very, literary oriented. She had a nice library of books. She was smart, but she just had some emotional issues that were for some reason insurmountable. But this is a microcosm to me, this Jean character. She's a microcosm. She's one of the many that lost their lives as part of the entire ordeal. She wasn't directly bombed, but it was part of it was the project of this thing that ended up probably getting her, because Oppenheimer couldn't be there for her. He had to keep going away and disappearing and everything. So, brilliantly executed. Brilliantly. One thing that I did do a lot of note-taking and thinking about was death as a theme in the movie. And I don't think it's just the death of people. Right? That's the obvious one. But again, this is speaking cinema, and we always dive deeper than you expect us to. So it's not just the death of bodies and the death of people and the death of brains. It's the death of a stage in society. You know what I'm saying? It's a skin that's been shed. It's an innocence, I think, that's been lost. And like you said at the head of the episode, there's this sense that we are in a new zone of...
It's a new world. That was the quote from
world.
Niels Bohr when he comes back. He says, "This isn't a new weapon. It's a new world."
Yes. Yes, it's a new world. And listen, whenever something very significant politically, socially, or otherwise, right, movement happens, a certain leader is elected, there's a disaster that happens, Chernobyl, whatever it is, the world keeps rebirthing itself, right? The cultural world, our world. And when that happens, there is a death, and there's a no going back. That is some sort of a one-to-one conceptually with the idea of death, right? When a loved one or something that you know and someone that you know and is familiar with dies, there's so much significance to the fact that you can't go back. You can go back to recordings, right? You can go back to home videos. You can watch tapes. You can re-experience certain things, but the same way every time. There will be nothing new from that person giving themselves to the world or to you in the old way, and yet creating new versions of that. It is dead. So there's so many different places that we can point to in the mid, I think maybe the 13 or 1400s, we could say, the scientific revolution itself, right? Think about it for a second. Before these modern scientific theorems, there was a time, right? And it was different than it is now. The world was different before we were able to understand what those, just like we were looking up at the bomb, and you had those amazing eclipse glasses, which are actually for looking at eclipses.
Yeah, there's an eclipse earlier this summer.
Exactly. We can look up at that sky. We can stare at the moon through a microscope, or even with our bare eyes. We can look at stars. We can understand what those stars are. We can understand what we are, what our planet is. It's stardust. We know this now. And we walk outside and we look up at the night sky and we see these things, and it completely changes the whole idea of looking at the universe and figuring out your own personal place within it, and then what your goals are, and then your philosophy and everything that follows, right? As opposed to looking up at that sky and saying, the gods put those there. We must fear them. We must not do this. We must do that. Otherwise, they will descend from the heavens and they will strike us down and we will perish, right? Like Prometheus. Zeus apparently damned Prometheus for eternity because he stole fire from Olympus and gave it to the people, the humans, the civilization. Listen, the morals that we can get from these stories are absolutely immortal. They will live forever, and the meaning and significance of them. But in terms of being able to take a look and know physically what is happening, the world's completely different. And back to Oppenheimer, we've woken up in a new world after this bomb was dropped, right? Here's a question for you. We're going to get to building the bomb, but just because we're talking about morals and ethics for the time being of this thing, the thing is, it's a new world, but this world is supposed to be that there's a specific purpose for this. It's supposed to be safer, right? It's supposed to be deterrent, even though it was used. But I think Oppenheimer even says at one point, it must be used. Otherwise, it won't have any effect, right? He himself says that. It must be used in order to assure deterrence, right? So my question to you, Stonehouse, here is, yes, it's a new world, but is it a better world?
So I think the movie does a good job of showing how he doesn't really agree with the way that it was used. Because it's that kind of knee-jerk analysis to say, well, why did he build a bomb if he had, problems dropping it? It goes to great lengths to show how he was on board during the Nazi occupation and all the Western battles that were going on there. He assumed that it was to stop all of that going on. The project might have even been, I think it did start before Pearl Harbor even occurred. So he's there with that mind of, this is a world at war for the second time. I mean, I don't think they were calling it World War II at the time. Right. But he's seeing the world at war again. The first time, did not end well. We have nations destroyed. That's kind of what led to World War II, was a nation was destroyed and had to rebuild kind of on its own. And he's seeing it, as a way to stop that from happening. Now, what the movie gets into, and one of the themes I was talking about, was that idea of Frankenstein, of something, your creation getting out of your hands. So they finished making the bomb at around the time where Germany is set to be defeated or surrender. I believe someone even makes mention of Hitler's suicide in the movie, I think. So that is pretty much, they say victory is assured. Essentially over there. So they say that they're going to drop it in Japan. Now, characters in the movie also say, I forget if it was Oppenheimer or some of the other scientists, but they say it seems they're, on their last legs over there. There's really not a lot more they can do. But, the government is insisting, we need to use this. It really is probably less to show Germany or any of the Axis powers what they're willing to do. It's really to show the world and to show Russia at that point what they have. So Oppenheimer's control over it, he's spends all his time objecting not to the dropping of the bomb, but to the dropping of the bomb on Japan and to the dropping of the bomb used for any purpose that you deem necessary. So the fact that it wasn't really used to end World War II the way we've kind of been taught, kind of doing like a people's history Howard Zinn lesson here. But, you're taught America dropped the bomb, the atomic bomb, to end World War II. But what Oppenheimer, the movie, is saying is what a lot of maybe revisionist is the wrong word, but revisionist history is saying is that doesn't really ring true anymore, because that war seemed to be in Europe was pretty much over, and in Japan and the Pacific front that was wrapping up and was also it didn't require an atomic bombing. And it didn't require
they do
the
mention
war crime of dropping it on civilian cities.
They mention in the movie that, I think Oppenheimer says that, I wouldn't have chosen the Japanese are already, going to retreat and lose the war or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Right. So I think the movie went to great lengths to show how he objected specifically to the way it was used and not that it was used.
Right. Yeah, and I think that also goes very much into our final image and final sequence, right? So I think we're going to postpone the rest of that kind of conversation for that moment. That's going to be a lot of, I was going to say fun, but It'll be informative and very, fruitful for thought.
I got one more fun question for you.
Sure.
Before we move on from like, I think we're still at the beginning of the movie. But there's the quote. I think you mentioned it earlier. It was the important thing isn't can you read the music, it's can you hear it? Can you hear the music? And now, as a musician yourself, what do you think about the comparison between science and music? One is thought of as kind of one area of study or our brains, and the other is the complete opposite. So what do you think of that comparison between the two?
That is a great question. I was thinking about that. I was hoping we had time for it, but yeah, I am a musician. I'm a singer and a pianist, and I teach piano. And it's so I really get into the details of this with especially advanced students. The whole concept of expression in music, phrasing, is what makes music really become, there's no other way to put it, but musical. It's very theoretical, right? And I always tell students that phrasing and expression in music is an individual craft. I'm going to teach you the theories of it here, but again, theory only goes so far, right? In order to express ideas and say something, have a conversation with the audience, with the listeners, at a recital, for example. That is something that you will be studying for your entire life. You will be reckoning with it, rediscovering things about it your whole life and your whole career that you have with your instrument, whether it's your voice or a physical instrument. And it's sort of the same thing here, right? I think that Nolan is drawing a comparison here to a sort of process about, or at least specifically Oppenheimer's process, right, about this. And I think that professor character, the Kenneth Branagh, I always forget his name, the character, but I think what he's telling Oppenheimer is, listen, are you able to see something in this that other people aren't? Is this an individual talent that you have that you're not hearing from other people? Because that is very comparable to music. When you're playing a piece, I always say this as well. When you play a piece for someone, you're showing them who you are. Because no person is going to play the same phrase, the same note even, of a piece the exact same way. And even you are not going to play the same phrase twice, ever, the exact same way. It's always going to be different. So it's like a fingerprint. It's individual for everyone. So you are literally showing us who you are. Now, how does that have to do with physics? I think it does, because when we're talking about it's an analogy, I think, for the entire idea of discovery. And not just the idea of discovering physical attributes of the universe, but what these people are. And you said like a portrait of a young artist. It is comparable to a young artist, a musician, say, because what these people are doing, these scientists, is they're reckoning with not just their discoveries, but what the discoveries mean, the meaning of them, the significance to humanity, the changes that will occur in humanity, what technology does to us. It's not just the technology itself. I think that's part of the consciousness of Oppenheimer. And I think that goes to why we see all these images firing in his head. They are the music. They are the expression, the meaning, what it's saying, commenting about us. It's not just the physical. I think Nolan is drawing this connection very well. It's the physical that's connecting with the socio-political, right? And the socio-political is what actually causes people to die. That's the balance. And it's not like when I play a piece on the keyboard on the piano, people might start dying, right? But it's taking something
If
physical.
I did, they would.
Perhaps. I can't promise anything. But with a good teacher, there's always hope. That's a very teachery thing to say. But yeah. But when you're taking something physical that's in front of you, like the universe and how it works, like sheet music, and everyone else can look at it and see the same thing. But what does this thing mean for people? What does it tell us about us? What's the emotional component that comes out of that thing that exists physically when you apply yourself to it in a very specific way? In music, that specific way is given the room, given the vibe of the piece, given the atmosphere, given what you think about it. In science, it's given the socio-political moment and what that means, how that corresponds to the theory, how that corresponds to what you've cracked about the physical world. Those are tangoing with each other, and that's the expression, that's the phrasing of science and physics. And that's how these people are comparable to artists. So yeah, I think that's a great question. And I know we are at the beginning of the movie, but I just wanted to get your quick thought, if you wanted to add anything on specifically, unless you want to go back to this, that's fine, but specifically on these images, these cutaways to the consciousness of Oppenheimer, the fire and the cool effects, which were not done with CGI. Apparently, everything was practical. Apparently, what do you think about those? Is there anything that I didn't say that you think about that? Because it's the most artsy, it's the most artistic and cinematic part of the film. But yeah,
I just want to emphasize the thing that you said about use the word theory, and I think that's also a great segue into the next part of the movie. Is there's in both music and science, there's theory and practice, and so the beginning of this movie and those things about hearing the music, there's that theory part of it, but then there's a difference between being able to maybe hear, think, theorize about music and science, and then being able to put it in practice. And that's what Oppenheimer had a lot of help with. And now we're on to the second part of the movie, which I have it split up into kind of a 3-act structure. I called this part, "We're getting the band back together," like the quote from Blues Brothers and I think a couple other things. Or you could call it "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb." The subtitle from Dr. Strangelove. Because in this part of the movie, they're just solely focused on getting this thing built, and nothing else is really given a thought until the very end. But so in this part of the movie, the thing about that theory versus practice, he has so many different people. Oppenheimer has so many different people on the project to do the things that he can't, which are that lab work you were talking about. He's messy. He's screwing things up in the lab, and his professor's making fun of him. He's admitted himself that he's not very good at the math of this, but he has all those ideas, and that is basically what I'm saying about those visions that he has of the things swirling around. That shows he's the ideas guy, but he's not the practice guy.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to put it. Those are really two different types of brains, types of people. And I think it also shows very adequately what's to come, because what's to come is Los Alamos. That thing, it's amazing how many moving parts are part of that operation. And yes, he's the director of it. It's almost like directing a film and all of the departments. But it shows you that in order to accomplish something so grand and so big, you need all of the different people. Like, he starts teaching quantum theory, right, in school in America. and he wants to evangelize, he wants to spread the word about it. And many of those students that he had in that class become his trusted, compadres in Los Alamos, like, Alex Wolff's character and all these other dudes. They each have their own specialty way of thinking, or, their own kind of outside of the box ideas that they want to bring to this. And yeah, he can't do it by himself. He has the vision. He has the ideas, like you said, but he needs help. And that was also a really cool thing. That's the whole getting the band back together kind of a thing. And it also reminded me of like Armageddon, which I love that movie. Everyone hates that movie. They love to hate it, I think. But I think
it's in the Criterion
awesome.
collection, I believe. So
it is out of print, and I have it.
Uh-huh.
I have it, and I have a huge book, on like a sort of picture and description book on like the making of the movie and everything. But yeah, but that movie has an incredible getting the band together and go shooting out into space to save the universe kind of a plot. So that was a great example of it. But yeah, getting the band together and getting the right people for the job. And I think that's also interesting too, Stonehouse, because there's such an uplifting message that comes with getting people together. We also talked about this in the Cube episode, but how hard it is to get people together and use all of their individual talents and cooperate and correspond with each other in such a way where you get the big goal accomplished. There's such a, like, I know we might be skipping ahead slightly, but when the bomb is built and they test it, just everyone's reaction to it, the partying, everyone is just so elated that this happened. The clapping, hugging, popping open the champagne. It was quite a thing to see. And that's a very uplifting thing, right? This whole part of the movie is very intense in a different way, right? It is uplifting. We can do this. We get together. We want to win the war. We can cooperate. Matt Damon comes along and he's kind of a hard ass, and he's kind of like, they have to complement each other, he and Oppie somehow, but they do it, and somehow this miracle of humanity coming together, and these egos not, sometimes people are out of there, like I think Teller at one point or something, but
he keeps threatening to quit. I forget if he actually did.
Yeah. So, but that's quite an accomplishment. And then the way that is such an antithesis to the last portion of the movie is in itself striking and very important. Very, very, very important. And I think that is like what we talked about before, that the instinct is much faster. It's in a much faster rhythm than the introspection and the what have we actually done here? What are we actually doing here? But I want to ask you, how do you think that the film handled in between those two moments of Oppenheimer and others weighing what it is that they're actually doing? Like, was there an effort enough? And did the film show it enough, I think, is what I'm asking, for characters, not just Oppenheimer, to really weigh the ethics of what they're doing, to try and be, like cognitively ahead of what the end result was going to be, to try and prevent, the worst.
So I think during this time, what we were shown is that it was truly a race against time. And it was that I think they said the Germans were working on one. And then there's that added thing of that somehow the Russians got information or they were also working on something. And there's this kind of three-way trinity going on. And it's clear that in this point, they really aren't thinking about the repercussions. It's basically that one-track mind of we're building this bomb because we have a head start, they said, against the Germans because they know they have some contacts that somehow get information that they're going down a different route that they had already tried. And so they're a year or so ahead of them. And that sounds like a lot, but if you're on a years long project, that's really, you know, they kind of need any lead they can get. So they're really fast tracking this thing with the assumption that this is all going based on assumption that it's going to be used to end the Nazi regime.
Right.
And so what I think this section does so well is that it shows that half of it, you know, getting the scientists together, working on stuff, making their creation. There's a whole second half of this middle part of the movie that's showing how Oppenheimer's once again making the wrong decisions, and he won't know that until later. But it starts with bringing his old students and connections, his brother, onto the project because they are either current or former communists, and that is something that I was going to talk about in the beginning, but I kind of I want to give us time to cover everything. But now we can talk about how. Early in his life, and then even on this project, he was brought in what you would call enemies of that America. Everybody at the time was very against anybody who had anything to do with communism. But you talked about how, the McCarthy era, exactly, who is even name-checked in this movie. You're talking about how Matt Damon's character, General Groves, eventually in this movie. They're making me a general for this.
Right. Admiral to general.
So he also, you said he was a hard ass, but he actually lets Oppenheimer slide on a lot of stuff. And now he does that because he knows that this is essential to getting the bomb made and wrapped on time. And to get, that's his main task. He is tasked with basically building the bomb, but he's not a quantum physicist. He did Oppenheimer does mention he studied physics or some sort of science at MIT. But his task within the government or the military industrial complex is getting the bomb made. And so he is willing to cut Oppenheimer a lot of slack. He's like, all right, fine, you can bring these people on the project, but they need to be separated. And then Oppenheimer's like, actually, we all need to be in the same room together. And he's like, okay, but only once a week. And so you see this compounding thing that eventually does lead to one of the people, I have it written somewhere. One of the people on the project is a spy for the Russians and is feeding them information. And so it's really hard to say what was the right and wrong decision, because if he didn't have all those people in the room together at the same time, and if they weren't the people that he trusted and he knew were the smartest and the best, would the atomic bomb have been made by America in time? That it's kind of hard to say, because it's just a big what if. It's a hypothetical question. But at the same time, that caused basically the Cold War to happen, because that information was fed to Russia for them to build basically exactly what we had at a similar scale. And so then you had that idea of, it's not mentioned by name in this movie, but the idea of mutually assured destruction, that both parties have enough arms to destroy the world. And so what do? You just sit on that and hope the other person doesn't do it. But you have to have enough so that you can fire back if they fire at you. Right.
Yeah, it's a game of pure hard power and soft power, kind of playing with each other constantly. And in that respect, I think the movie does take on a meaning of sort of defining power in so many different ways, and how becoming more and more powerful, not just as a politician or as a scientist, but as a species in our influence with each other, and the power of leverage as a form of, I sort of call this sort of leverage of, mutually assured destruction sort of a thing, or deterrence, I guess it would be that kind of power, the power of that magnitude of deterrence. I sort of call it a hard soft power, because until you're actually bombing someone, you're not bombing them, you're not destroying them, you're just kind of having conversations, right? But if you know that there's a direct link right away from the conversation to the assured destruction of a society, it's sort of like a hard soft power. And I think that this movie outlines very clearly and very effectively. I think this is why it does it very well. Why it did very well for people. They could see clearly the relationship between the conversations of the time, of the moment, and the that potential energy, and as well as the kinetic real world power, hard power energy of a bomb. It draws the line. It's conversation, 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 violence, right? It shows you that trajectory, that progression. It's so clear in this movie, and it just works in these layers, layer, 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 layer. Little insignificant conversation here. A military man comes to the post and talks to the scientist there. Couple, characters are drawn on a chalkboard, and then bam, right? The big bomb is dropped. So, yeah, it's just amazing how this section really this section is really important in moving the momentum forward in all of that to lead toward what eventually happens. Now, we don't show in this movie the actual bombing of Nagasaki or Hiroshima, right? But it's referred to, but only after the bomb is tested for the first time, right? I guess it's near Los Alamos, or is Los Alamos? Something
I
like
think
that.
they built a recreation center at Los Alamos.
Yeah, build me a town.
Build the whole town.
I love that. Build the man a town.
And then his wife's like, "Where's the saloon or something?" Because it looks like an old Wild West town where they just built
Yeah,
row,
it so does.
just one straight row of buildings.
Yeah, it's like, where's the OK Corral? I'm up for a shootout. Yeah, it's like like those sets that they used to erect for those old like John Ford Western movies. It's like there's a mountain, and then 5 feet away from that, there's like a cardboard cutout of a saloon or whatever it is. I don't know, but yeah. So let's I think shift into, because I do want to get toward the final image soon, and then I want to wrap all of this movie up into a nice bow that we can talk about to really underscore our takes specifically on the movie, if we haven't already. But this third section, we have the test, right? Which we spoke a little about. I was talking about people's reactions to it. We have the test, and then after that, we have for lack of a better word, the fallout of the political fallout.
You're full of them. This episode is great.
It's almost like there's no other language to use. I did not plan any of this, and I'm not smart enough to just be able to use it improvisationally. I think I've been thinking so much about massive destruction on a level that people can't even imagine for the last 2 weeks, that I'm just like, this is nuclear, that's a nebula, this is a horrifying radiation of a time. I don't know whatever else I'm going to use, but yeah, I think that let's get into talking about this, and I really, really want to talk about Albert Einstein, but I think I might want to leave that a little bit toward the end. There's so much to talk about, but the one thing, I'll leave Einstein to the end. I think the one thing that we haven't really talked about that really is pivotal is straws.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking that I even want to leave that until right after we talk quickly about a scene that I'm very, very passionate about, and I wanted to get your take on it. And that's the speech scene in Los Alamos after, when Oppenheimer is talking to the people of Los Alamos, who are all cheering and American flags and everything. I believe it's to them, and he's like on that at that podium, and this is one of the most cinematic scenes in the movie, I think, right? Because what happens is he hears. I'm like even getting emotional just thinking about it. I'm literally getting goosebumps right now. He hears a scream. Among the people that are cheering, there's a scream sound, and when that happens, it initiates this silence in the room. They're all kind of cheering, but we don't hear them. We're kind of in Oppenheimer's POV and his consciousness right now. All he can hear is, like these bomb sounds, screams. The room lights up. The way that my goosebumps are like, towering out of my skin right now. We see the light, and just as if the nuclear blast had got off, and Oppenheimer's the only one that sees it, and he starts to see people's skin flaying off, and he starts to when he walks around after the speech, and he steps in a body that's been reduced to ash, while everyone is swirling around him, and then Nolan merges the screams with the cheers of the people, and Oppenheimer is clearly just extremely distraught about this. I just wanted to know, how did you feel when you watched this, and does the scene do what it's supposed to do, and what is it doing?
I think it's definitely one of the key scenes of the movie. It's so interesting how much this movie has to offer after the Trinity test, which you think is the climax of the movie, and there's really so many more things that build and fall, and there's so much more of the roller coaster ride of cinema to go. And let's start with just his decision to not show the atomic bombings of Japan, which it could be seen as exploitative. Sure, like, are we going to this movie just to see people be destroyed? That's why I think he preferred to show the Trinity test instead. He's saying, "Oh, you want your big explosions in Oppenheimer? You read about that news story that we exploded real bombs out in the desert. Well, here's your big real explosion." So people got what they paid for, but it wasn't at the expense of seeing, the lives that were lost that day. We didn't have to see that, but we do get to see this cinematic depiction of Oppenheimer's guilt. And this is, that key scene in the movie. Again, I feel like the movie is a lot more than just saying Oppenheimer feels guilty, but this is definitely the key scene that says that he has blood on his hands, that he'll say later to President Truman.
Right.
So I like that. The thing about the Trinity test, this scene, and later on, is that when he does this, he also drops audio. So, you're saying, oh, there's screams and there's those thundering footsteps, but there's also the silence. Now, this is a literal silence of before the shockwave of the bomb. You're not gonna hear that explosion until later, just the way light and sound have a delay on them, like how you can tell how close lightning is based on the thunder that appears after.
Right.
So there's that literal sense of it, but I think there's that sense of silence of having the time to think. Like one of the only times you might hear silence at home is maybe like when you're in the shower. People have shower thoughts of that, or going to bed. You lay up at night trying to go to sleep, but there's, for the first time of the day, there's silence, and you have to think about things that happened that day, or maybe the regrets of your entire life. This is like a common internet thing people post all the time, a meme of like, in the shower, having my shower thoughts about the things I should have said earlier today, or, I would have, done this years ago. So this is kind of that silence for him to stew in and see the effects that it causes. And you can definitely sense that this isn't the only moment that's going to happen for him. I think it's going to keep happening throughout his life. He's going to, and any moment that he has the time to think, that he has that silence, he's going to be thinking about the repercussions. And the final thing about this is that I want to say that there's a third climax of the movie that builds it. So they test the bomb and then they drop the bomb. That's kind of this version that they're showing instead of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The third bomb is when he gets the bomb dropped on him in the boardroom of it's so specific. I love how bureaucratic this is. It's the refusal to renew his security clearance. It's not a trial. They make that clear. It's not a trial, and they're not revoking his security clearance. They're just refusing to renew it. It's so minor and so bureaucratic, but they make it into a bomb that they drop on him in the end of the movie, because the same thing happens when he's being yelled at by Roger Robb, played so well by Jason Clarke. And also, if you haven't seen it, just a quick side note is he plays in I think a defense attorney in William Friedkin's last movie, the Kane Mutiny Court Martial. And so if you want to see more, if you didn't get your fix of Jason Clarke playing an attorney, it's a great courtroom drama. But anyway, you have him yelling at Oppenheimer, and then flash of light, complete silence in the boardroom as Oppenheimer's life is forever changed again.
Right. Yeah. That was a great summary and commentary of it. It really is an incredible sequence. My heart was I had seen the movie before, right? And of course I knew what was going to happen, and even knew what was going to happen pretty much before when I saw the movie the first time. But still, there's so much intensity in this thing. And Nolan has this great way of shooting and cutting for these big, lofty like ideas and sequences. But so evenly, like he gives you a little bit of these people over there, a little bit of that. It's all very maintained. He does that very well and very effectively here. And again, I think it goes back to, I think, what we've said already a bunch of times about people getting together and trying to do the right thing. And then even if you do the wrong thing in the right way, it's still going to be what many people think of as the wrong thing. You know, it's that idea of, what if you just are very effective at getting people together and creating something that divides everyone? You know, is that a good thing, or is it not? Is it a feat? Or, you know, is it moving forward, or is it moving backward? I guess it depends how you use it. You know, there are so many questions that this movie evokes. So I think it's up to everyone to kind of talk about that amongst themselves, because we could be here for 10 hours just talking about that alone. But yeah, amazing sequence. And I do love that portion of it when he's watching the bomb go off. And also, just, we haven't even talked about, in that moment, he's also just extremely worried because he might cause a chain reaction that destroys the entire world. Right? So it's not even just like, will this work and then possibly end the war? There's this upper echelon, this upper layer of concern that he and just a select other people that know about it has of, will it be able to take in the sheets? You know, will we just obliterate everything in this effort? And it's just heart-poundingly intense and suspenseful.
And he starts making his points clear too. He even as early as that scene, directly after it happens, he's like, also, I wish we could have dropped it on the Germans instead. Like, he's just throwing that out there, and that's like the rest of his life he's going to spend going. And that's why the biggest deal of this movie is the smallest thing, the refusal to renew a security clearance, is that he's no longer able to voice his opinion in the settings that matter. And that's what he started doing as far back as that scene where he's saying, don't you guys agree? Like, we should, this would have been a better way. And he's trying to kind of plant those seeds in people's mind that maybe the way it's going to be used from now on isn't ideal.
Yeah. So listen, I think what I want us to do is, we're going to go to the final sequence and final image, because I think we need to discuss that in order to then discuss Strauss and Einstein.
Yeah.
You know, and just sort of backpedal a little bit there. So I think I want to get all of that good stuff into this this final image discussion. So it's also coming up to almost 2 hours, and we don't want to take too much of our poor audience's time here, as Nolan did.
No, we need all our episodes to be exactly the runtime of the movies that we watch.
Right. Oh, okay. So let's talk about Strauss for 45 minutes. No. In that case. All right. So I have here Stonehouse. This is a quick final image and sequence that I have. I wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want to go too far back from the actual ending of the film. It's very simple because the sequence is simple, but conceptually, it's an overflowing river of meaning. And I want us to be able to to construct a boat that we can float on all this river of meaning for everyone. So let's take a look at the final image and sequence. Here's the summary of it that I put together. So Oppenheimer is talking to Albert Einstein on the lawn at Princeton. And of course, Strauss, played by Robert Downey Jr., is in the background, sort of watching them talk from a distance. Oppenheimer says to Einstein, and this is, of course, what we were wondering the entire time, as Strauss was, what was being said between these two men. Oppenheimer says to Einstein, "When I came to you with those calculations, we thought we might start a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world." Einstein says, "I remember it well. What of it?" Oppenheimer says, "I believe we did." Einstein's slight smile fades. Then Oppenheimer looks very worried. Then to a shot of missiles waiting to be launched. Then back to Einstein, who turns and walks away from Oppenheimer. A closer shot of a guilt-ridden Oppenheimer follows then. Then missiles fly through the air and into the clouds. Then we're closer in on Oppenheimer as he sits in the car being driven. And we see these street lights above him at night that sort of resemble missiles in the sky. And he's still sort of in a daze. We keep intercutting between the fire that's enveloping the sky and the continuing dolly forward toward Oppenheimer's worried face. Then, a shot of planet Earth with scattered explosions appearing all over the globe and sort of spreading. And then a wave of fire spreading even further across the Earth, enveloping it. Then, Oppenheimer closes his eyes, and the intense music stops. Then, it cuts to black. Whew. All right. Well, it's a hell of a final sequence. It was set up very, very effectively, I think. We've been wondering the whole damn movie what this guy said to Einstein. I was thinking we probably weren't even going to know what it was. You know, so it was kind of a real treat, a horrifying treat, to know what they actually said to each other in that conversation at the end. Our final image is Oppenheimer closing his eyes, and it cuts to black. Which is sort of a match on the beginning, with all that fire and stuff, and he opens his eyes after our opening sequence. So, what do you think of this, Stonehouse? Where to begin?
I want to begin by saying that was a great Einstein impression.
Oh, mine? I thought you were talking about the actor.
Well, both, I guess. Your impression of the actor's
much.
impression.
Dankeschön, Dankeschön.
I also want to emphasize that the missiles, I believe, are almost a flash forward to modern day. So those, like the ones back then, I think had to be dropped out of a plane, like they couldn't be launched. So the missiles that are shown are the ones that exist today, rocket propelled missiles. So that temporal flash forward, I think, is really fascinating in a movie set in the past. Like we get that picture that Nolan addresses really early on in our opening image. We were like, oh, he's going all over the place in this guy's life. He's going when he was young, when he was old. He's doing the dropping of the bomb. Whoever thought he would be showing us like today at the very end of this movie? One other recent movie that I think did that was also set in this time and place was what was the Glacier movie, the Holocaust movie that came out.
Oh, I don't. Oh,
The
here.
Zone of Interest.
Thank you. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't know how we
Yeah.
missed
So,
that. Yeah. Great movie.
but that also was set in the past, and it had that flash forward sequence at the very end to the
That
modern
final
day.
sequence was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And so I think it like showing that way that the past informs today is really interesting way of storytelling, because it's not something that's seen too often, I feel like. So to see both of those come out in like the same year was really interesting to me. But so the ending, yes, it shows the final image. Well, I guess the final image is him closing his eyes, but the real final image that you're left with is the nuclear annihilation of the Earth, which is a great. That's why people, I think, love the idea of Barbenheimer, of these two opposite movies, one a light comedy and the other just a devastating, dark depiction of our world. So that with that nuclear annihilation of the Earth, you're getting the culmination of the chain reaction that we've been talking about throughout this episode, of science itself being a chain reaction. And Einstein is part of this conversation in the final scene because he's part of the chain reaction. You think about Einstein's theories, how quantum physics started because of that. And I love the scene where he's remember in the movie, Oppenheimer gives him Teller's calculations, and he's like, take a look at these, what do you think of them? And at the end, he forgets to take them back, and Einstein's like, these are yours, not mine. And he's placing the blame from himself back onto Oppenheimer.
I don't want any part of this. I'm not touching that paper. Yeah.
Even though like all he's really doing is giving him his piece of paper back, because it's, it would be trash to him at that point. I think there's a point where he says, you've kind of been forgotten and left out at this point because you can't keep up anymore. So he started it. Then quantum mechanics gets developed by Bohr and Heisenberg, who are both shown in this movie, giving talks at different times. So Einstein, to quantum mechanics, to splitting the atom. This is done by, I wrote all this down. This is done by Hahn and Strassmann, is a team that achieves splitting the atom. Then you go to Teller's contribution on the project is the idea of the hydrogen bomb using fusion instead of fission. But I believe he said he was launching a fission bomb at another, something like that. He was using the one idea that they had already done, fission, and he was incorporating fusion into it. And then Fermi and Szilard are the ones that do the self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. And that, so you see how throughout this movie, the science compounds on one another. Einstein, Bohr and Heisenberg, Hahn and Strassmann, Teller, Fermi and Szilard. And it culminates in Oppenheimer. He's the one that takes all these ideas. He's the ideas guy. He hears the music, and then he gets everybody to put it together. That leads to the atomic bomb. And then that leads to the end of the world. That's what I was saying earlier about the doomsday clock, is that if you keep going down this path, like what if Einstein had never even come up with his ideas about the quantum realm or physics, or whatever his contributions were? They're essential to our scientific understanding today, but they can also be blamed for the route it went down, that others took it.
Yeah. It's a confounding question. I think that I've talked about this before, but the fact that we are such explorative creatures it's enlightening about the physical universe around us, but at the same time, it's profoundly dangerous, right? And just, we all know about our own proclivities as human beings. Our nature is quite a destructive one. oftentimes. And yeah, when we're talking about these immense amounts of power that come with these discoveries, the immense amount of threat that comes to another civilization, and then in return, it begs all of these really interesting questions about what really is the project. You know, what is the project here? What is the goal here? Is it to kill as many people as possible? But then are you going to use a utilitarian defense of that and say, oh no, but we, like we did in World War II, oh no, but we need to kill all these people in order to protect all of the other people, right? We're using the few in terms of compared to the global population, we're using the few to save the many, right? Does this become a trolley car argument scenario? I mean, you know, what exactly are we doing here? And I feel like this movie has a great way of telling us, hey, figure out the question fully before you ask the right questions and figure out the answer to those questions before you go on that path, before you lead a path leading to the point of no return. This chain reaction. Try to have some sort of foresight against and ahead of the chain reaction. I just want to talk about. I think the Einstein thing is incredible, and we just talked about that. I could talk about just the Einstein thing for a while. I don't want to, because I do want to fit Strauss in there, because Strauss was a pivotal part of the ending of this movie, not necessarily the final sequence, but he does say one of my favorite lines in the movie, having to do with Strauss, was that I think it was his advisor or something that said right when Strauss finds out.
Ehrenreich's character.
Yeah, exactly. Alden Ehrenreich's character. He's like a Senate aide, I think he's credited as, but that aide tells him. First, I think it's Strauss says something like, they must have been talking. What do you think that they said that was about me that made Einstein just walk right by me as if he never knew me or didn't want to see me? Like, what did Oppenheimer say that made me look so bad? Because he's just found out that he lost the confirmation or something, right? So he's not going to be a senator. So the aide says to him, maybe they were talking about something else. And then as he opens the door for Strauss to have to go in and do that press con, walk through the paparazzi or whatever, he says, maybe it was about something more important. It's just so good. So what does that say about the movie? What is the movie saying, rather, about Strauss throughout the whole film with that moment? And again, if you can connect that to your take for us.
Yeah, so I think your take about male ego feeds into this so much that Strauss could not conceive that they weren't talking about him and that everything was revolving around him. And so one of the things I said at the very outset was that this movie is less about Oppenheimer building the bomb and his regret about building the bomb more than it is about all the people that conspired to kind of take him down and take him out of the equation. And because he was taken out of the equation, leading to a world where his creation can be used without, not the way that he intended to. So, for this, the Shakespearean tragedy part of it, I have, Strauss is the architect of it. He's the one that basically uses it. It's not even the personal side of it plays into it, but it's more about him than it is about Oppenheimer, because he's trying to get nominated. If he wasn't trying to get nominated into it's the Commerce Secretary cabinet position of the current administration.
Oh, that's
so.
There you go.
Yes. Okay. So That's what he's trying to do. And if that weren't the case, he probably wouldn't be doing this at all. But because it plays such a key part, they're saying, hey, they're questioning his decisions. His a lot of this movie is supposed to be about Oppenheimer. Why did you do this? And don't you have regrets? Well, now Schwarz is facing the same thing. So he has to figure out what to do. And so first, he's like, well, people have a lot of sympathy for Oppenheimer and people liked him. They showed him, I think, as Man of the Year on Time that year. And so Schwarz is like, well, maybe I should play into how we worked together. So he starts with that. And then people start to question, well, what about all these things that went wrong? And you were talking about how this movie is a lot about mistakes and how
chain reaction of errors and mistakes.
Yeah. So mistakes plus ego is kind of what leads Schwarz to reverse his position. And then he's like, instead of trying to ally himself with Oppenheimer, he's going to show how he was against him in all these ways and how he was right, Oppenheimer's wrong. And so that's the kind of takedown of him. And this section of the movie I called Reputation Era, which is a reference to the Taylor Swift Eras tour and her album Reputation. This is kind of her dark era where she sheds her old country girl pop image and goes for it's still pop music, but she goes for like a darker edge, and she's getting revenge, and these songs are really biting and scathing. So this is the Reputation era of Schwarz, assuming that kind of snake-like, that's a recurring image from the tour. The snake-like person who's hiding in the grass, ready to grab you and attack you, and also how Oppenheimer's reputation's taken down in this. And I also called it the trial of J. Robert Oppenheimer, because it's not a trial, as we mentioned, but it really there are a lot of components to it. The fact that each side has counsel and they're taking statements, reading into the record, all these things that make it the trial. So
yeah. There's so much there. I mean, so like you said, it is a Shakespearean cast of characters, a very large one, hopefully with a big enough stage to accommodate all of them. And it's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's a cool summary. Back to my take. Yeah, it's about dropping the bomb and how that corresponds with dropping the ball. A chain reaction of misfires and errors, and hindsight is always going to make these things clear, right? Like, this was an election year that we're in right now. And when the loser of an election loses, especially when it's not the candidate that you thought was going to lose, then what happens, right? All this finger pointing and blaming and what should we have done? What shouldn't we have done? Right? That's what they always say. That's that side that loses. So
questioning temperament, which is what happens in this movie.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know that you're making mistakes, and they become obvious mistakes only after you've lost, and that's the most difficult thing. That I think that's the conundrum of the human condition that I think that this movie is outlining. It's that hindsight is 20/20, but foresight is practically blind, right? And that probably needs to change sometime soon. So the fan question for this episode is, what do you think is the next paradigm shifting event in society likely to be? That's a tough one, but I know I have my answer, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. And I'm sure Stonehouse probably has his own answer brewing in his mind right now. But we want to hear from you guys. You can answer the fan question in the comment section of whatever forum or channel that you've received this podcast on. And I just want to thank you guys for participating in that. We always love to hear your feedback, your answer to the fan question. We want to converse with you. We want to talk with you. If you leave a comment, we will get back to you and start a conversation. That's what we love to do here. We like to talk about the important and interesting things that movies make us think about. That's exactly what we're doing. So I want to extend a huge thank you to Nicholas Stonehouse, or Barbie, rather. Thank you, Barbie, for coming onto the podcast
Barbenheimer.
again. Thank you, Barbenheimer, and gracing us with your presence. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy life to talk about movies with me and to give, I think, a nice shining star to Christopher Nolan, because he created one hell of an amazing movie, and it's really resonating with people. But like you said, maybe not necessarily in all of the ways that the movie was intended to be, but you've helped disseminate that for us today. So thank you for doing that, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It was fun.
It's always fun, and I hope you come back again soon. And thank you again to all of the listeners out there for watching and listening, whatever channel this is on. If you could like, follow, comment, subscribe, share this podcast if you find it valuable. Help us spread the word about Speaking Cinema. And I really look forward to the next episode. We will be revealing, as we always do, on our Instagram page, which is Speaking Cinema Podcast. That's also our YouTube channel. We also have a TikTok, which is Speaking Cinema Pod. And we will always be announcing on our Instagram channel, 1 week prior to the dropping of the episode, which episode or which movie we will be doing next. So check us out on Instagram and follow us for that. And until next time, I'll see you on the next episode.